before we get into some other notable releases like Bad Times at the El Royale, which I did already see, and The Hate U Give and stuff like that, sorry to bother you. I thought I'd go ahead and do what I did last year and just put all these leftover horror movies on one video together. I think there were 8 last time, and there's only 7 this time, but still hitting just as many highs and lows as we usually do, as this genre takes us in so many different directions in quality. As this will show us, we've obviously got the new Halloween movie and ending on the last Sharknado movie. Clearly quality's going to be all over the damn place, but we do have a couple of good ones here, so... obviously we're going to start with Halloween, David Gordon Green's new, apparently, direct sequel to the original movie, completely taking out everything from the original Halloween 2 and forward. Which means it should probably have a slightly different title than this. It's a little hard to think about the original Halloween and then its direct sequel, Halloween. But, yeah, whatever. I guess they want to... Because you can't even really say reboot either, because they're not even really trying to do that, despite the fact that even though we are completely taking out everything from Halloween 2 and forward, still plenty of callbacks to the movies in between. So, I don't know, but we do start with, obviously, one of the... Sometimes it's a bit risky to do the constant callback thing, and it's like, is it going to look like a crutch, or is it going to be a bit too much sometimes? Is it even necessary? But for the most part, they do find good ways to do it, starting with this opening. Like, as soon as I saw the orange font, it was like, I wanted that. But I did like also that before we did the usual, since we're obviously going to do an ode to the original opening title sequence with the theme and the pumpkin and all that, the fact that they decided to do a cold open before it was a really interesting choice that I really like. This really sort of eerie opening, which takes full advantage of one of the main things I loved about the original movie, which was being able to do some of the scarier aspects of the story in broad daylight. How this is like one of the more startling scenes in the movie, this opening, and it's just right in the opening with the sun in the sky and everything. Even when you're supposedly protected by the fact that everybody's chained to the ground, there's still just something so effective about this scene. And then obviously going into the opening and then introducing the 1 or 2 characters we knew before, but mostly a set of entirely new ones, mainly people, the different generations that are in Laurie's family now, and seeing where exactly she has ended up in this time period, where even after 40 years she's still very much anticipating some sort of... There is the whole thing where she's making it like a whole ceremonious sort of cathartic thing that she's going to get to watch him transferred off to be locked away forever. But she kind of knows what's going to happen. It's almost like she saw the movies we're pretending don't exist. One detail that actually is seemingly really small, that I actually really love, is the fact that you'll notice in like Halloween H2O, she looked like Jamie Lee Curtis. She had the short hair and everything. I don't know exactly what it is, but I just love the fact that they gave her the long hair that she had in the original movie. Like, it's just one detail, but it's almost like it feels like it's played such a big part in realizing that this is still that character. Not to mention all the PTSD and stuff like that, but you know, that too, of course. And yeah, going on the things that they were really bringing back, like the fact that Carpenter worked on the score. It is like, if you're expecting like a totally different score, you might be just a tad disappointed, except for like the last 10 or 15 minutes. Given that most of the score, not that this is disappointing, but just to be aware, like 90% of the time the score is playing in the movie, it's just the original theme over different scenes. But you can tell that there were changes made as it gets on, like I said, especially in the last 10 minutes or so. And it's just effective as it was before. It does feel like there's something about the old theme in there, but it's also, you can tell that it's modernized, but they don't, that sounds bad when you say it if you don't hear it, but it does actually work. It actually feels like it's in the tone of the era that it's set in, while also keeping what was so great about it before. Also bringing back people like Nick Castle and Tony Moran. I love the idea that they actually brought back the dude that played him when his mask was off, to play him again when his mask is off, even though they do play it a bit differently here, where we got a pretty clear shot of his face there at the end of the original movie, but I really love what they're doing here, where it feels like maybe in retrospect they show his face a lot in this, but when you really look at it, it's like constantly obscured in one way or another. There's even a moment where it's like when they're in the back of the car and it's like the camera's like right on his face, yet there's still like a blur there practically. And the way they were able to use those techniques to sort of hide that really helped a lot. I don't want to spend too much of this calling out Rob Zombie for doing things that I didn't care for, but I do like the whole obscuring of the face thing quite a bit. So I mean, I guess you could say Zombie did that a little bit, but not in this effective of a way, to where you could tell they're intentionally sort of shrouding it. Um, and obviously they're going to explore other things in regards to the difference in back then and today, most notably the body count, where obviously there's going to be a significant more amount of kills in this. I don't know. I kind of would have found it a bit interesting if they sort of kept with the small body count that you would see in that era, where like you hear about, like they even mention in the movie where it's like he killed. I want to on the night itself. I think it was four, because it would have been the truck driver, Annie, Linda, and Bob, with the fifth one being Judith, if she counts. Unless I'm missing somebody, I think that's it. Which of course was this big whole killing spree on that night in '78, and then a character actually calls out and says, "Wow, that's such a small number, actually." When you look at it today, because I just recently watched Silent Scream with Barbara Steele, which is a slasher movie that came out the year after the original Halloween. And it's like the first thing that struck me was like, it is definitely a slasher movie through and through, but only like 3 people were killed in it. And it's like sort of that style back then, and I do like definitely that they were gonna if they had to update it, yeah, they're gonna have to up the body count for sure. Which also helps that it just sort of, because yeah, in the original movie it's random, but it's like sort of everybody, with the exception of the truck driver, everybody kind of in Laurie's vicinity that he had spent the whole day stalking. But the kills in this just feel so like insanely random, to where they could actually be anybody. There's even a point in time where apparently we're not even discriminating in regards to age, and that's a really interesting scene, because I don't think, at least in obviously in the beginning of Zombie's first movie, but as far as Michael Myers as we know him, like in the jumpsuit and the mask and all that, and stalking around neighborhoods, I don't think we've seen that happen before. So it's pretty much, so whenever Michael's walking around and we see kids everywhere, suddenly it's like nobody's off limits, which is a feeling I don't think we've quite had before. So I really like that they took that leap that you wouldn't normally. So I guess it made it cool now to kill kids on screen. Everybody feels like, oh, we can do that? Holy shit, let's start doing that. And obviously, like I said, there will be some of the callbacks can be, maybe they're a bit risky. I do much more appreciate the callbacks to just the original movie. I do feel like it's a bit cheap to say, fuck all the other movies, we're just doing a direct sequel to the first movie, because that's the only one that matters. But then you have like all these different callbacks to those other movies, and it's like, do you want to forget they existed, or do you not? And what exactly does this bring to it? Are you trying to show a love for the franchise by saying we want to completely take out the franchise? But like, so like you saw, there's some stuff that's direct, like I think the Silver Shamrock masks were in there, and then sometimes you have scenes like the scene in the gas station bathroom felt a lot like the public bathroom scene in Halloween H2O. It's just stuff like that. I don't know if that was intentional or not. And then you have the way that kills are handled, obviously for the most part, they got a bit more graphic as the series went. But the interesting thing to notice about the original movie was the fact that, with the exception of Bob, the main kills. Well, working with that low number again. So basically, we're just talking about Annie and Linda. But Michael was like all about the strangulation. Then, even though he's like he's mainly associated with the knife. Like a lot of his kills are strangling, and I like that this movie sort of reverted back to that. And so there is a lot of strangling in this, but it also kind of goes into a certain brutality that's sort of like they tried to find a balance to what violence in horror movies is like nowadays to also back then. But it's like there's one particular scene where a dude is getting his head slammed against the wall repeatedly, and that's like that would be what Rob Zombie's Michael Myers would do. So that was kind of jarring to see, and the whole teeth thing was like, is this? It was kind of hard to tell like which style they were going for in regards to exactly how violent he is. Because then there's one kill towards the end that you could sense everybody in the theater just recoiling and wincing. That's just so over the top. Even in this movie, even after the teeth and the head smashing and all that against the wall, this is another head smashing I'm referring to, but much more over the top and graphic. It definitely, and I know some people will say like, oh, Michael did crazy stuff like that in the sequels, but it's like you can't really use the sequels as an example if we're pretending they don't exist, because that's the whole point of this one. This is strictly supposed to be the Michael that was in the first movie, and that's it. So yeah, some of these feel a bit over the top. And yeah, you can probably say, well, he's been incarcerated for 40 years. He's probably got all that, rage inside him. But he's also 40 years older. I don't know. I don't know that I fully buy the more brutal kills. But I do like that for the most part they're relatively low key the way they were before. And not all of them are like the big bloody messes that like Zombie went for. So there is that. Every now and then there is like there's a particular scene where everybody is like I can't really think of anybody that was flat out bad. And you certainly have experienced actresses in here, not just like Jamie Lee Curtis, but also like Judy Greer. But Judy Greer does have one scene that should be like a really big scene, where she's basically going through all the exposition of what it was like growing up with Laurie Strode as a mother. And it's not only is like her delivery feel really often weird, but just the sort of suddenness of this giant exposition dump in this movie that's supposedly going after the tone of the original movie, which really didn't tell us much of anything. Yeah, Loomis was kind of an exposition machine, but it still felt relatively natural with how he was talking about it and how it would come up. And it was really kind of necessary. But here it kind of, and it also felt like she was talking to somebody that would know this already. But I don't know, it just kind of struck me as weird a little bit. There are going to be comedic elements to it, especially with Danny McBride as a co-writer. And I had kind of heard that going in, that there was a lot of sort of the comedy relief characters, but the thing that I actually found interesting about that I wasn't really expecting to, was that the characters that you could consider the comedy relief, which I'm guessing are the kid that Laurie's granddaughter's friend was babysitting, and Toby Huss, who was Laurie's son-in-law. But they don't really feel like they're doing that to be comedy relief in a horror movie. It just sort of felt like this is how the characters behave. Like, it didn't really feel like they were performing like a type or being a type of character that was just needed amongst all these other ones. So I really didn't mind that at all. And definitely with McBride as a writer, that was something that I was a bit worried about. But yeah, it's fine, really. And speaking of Toby Huss's character, there is another, I'm assuming, callback, and I'm actually a little disappointed they didn't, like, they kind of went a little more into it because there was like one line in passing where he was talking about his old friend Lonnie who had like punched somebody or something. And obviously, your immediate thought is, I wonder if that's the Lonnie that went up to the house that Loomis scared off. And it's like, they were in a group. Was this guy that's married to Laurie Strode's daughter one of the kids in that group? And they were like friends that whole time because they brought Lonnie up again like twice. And it was like, okay, this is so unsubtle. I am pretty sure that's supposed to be the same character. um, this unseen character now. So there is that, and there's also they bring back the similar shots, but they have sort of a bit of a reversal, like how they completely recreate the school scene, which I think I read somewhere that PJ Souls, who played Linda, is the teacher in that scene, but I think we don't see her, we just heard her voice. But I think I remember reading that like right before I went in. And then there's the whole thing where she looks out the window the way Laurie did, but instead of seeing Michael, it's Laurie. Which is, so they kind of do that, which for the most part is really clever. That's something that less skillfully done could have easily fallen flat, but I feel like they actually did that kind of stuff and toyed with the expectations you have going in, having the first one like absolutely in your mind, and the fact that they sort of knew people were going to go in like knowing every single damn frame of the original movie. And to sort of have fun with that. So, and those people that would be knowing of those sort of things. Um, and yeah, really just the way a lot of it is shot too. How we have those sort of long shots, like sort of not as accomplished as the opening scene of the original movie, but still when Michael's just kind of roaming around. There's a shot that I love a lot when he goes after his second victim in this neighborhood, and we see him go up onto the porch, and then we see his reflection in the window, and then he takes off this way, and then as we see the woman just walking through her house, we see Michael's shadow go by in another window over here as he's making his way around. And it's like just seeing that shadow like it's a shark fin just going around the house. There's just something so wonderfully sinister about that. And I would have loved to have seen like more stuff like that. Like the whole middle portion of the movie could have been stuff like this, just Michael stalking around in silence and shooting these scenes in different ways. But we do have a lot of characters to deal with. Like I said, there's like 3 generations going on here with Laurie, and then Judy Greer, and then Judy Greer's daughter as well. But they all do come together nicely. Like it doesn't feel like there's too many characters, which I was kind of starting to worry about as they were getting introduced. Some of them just kind of unceremoniously leave, like they don't even get killed; they just disappear. That's a bit anticlimactic, and it makes you wonder if those characters are even necessary. But yeah, after a while, you don't really like. It's something that you more realize in retrospect, which is interesting because you do have in a movie like this, you do kind of think you only introduce characters to either die or fight him in some way, fight him off in some way, and sometimes characters can just not do either of those and just slip out of the movie unscathed, even if they're a piece of shit. Seemingly like I'm guessing there's like an intentional misdirection there, where it's like you set somebody up to be a total piece of shit, and you think, oh, they're definitely going to be killed, and then they actually just never come back. So sure, there's got to be something intentional about having characters like that not suffer that fate when the audience is just sort of expecting. You've got to, in something as admittedly predictable as the slasher movie genre, it's like you do have to do everything you can to play with expectations at least a little bit, because they're always going to end up knowing, where it's going to end up. And speaking of where it ends up and the ending, apparently, you may look at it and think that it's a bit, it looks like an ending, like it's a satisfying ending. The entire last 10 or 15 minutes of this movie is amazing. Like just like those scenes that sort of catch you, like, yes, I love that moment. The last 10 or 15 minutes is just nothing but those, just a long line of those. Those amazing moments. But even so, as satisfying as like the whole thing is, you still might think they're not showing enough for you to be absolutely certain this is an ending. So I wasn't surprised at all to learn that apparently what David Gordon Green and Danny McBride did was they wrote two movies that they had planned on shooting back to back. But apparently they sort of they reined it in and said, we'll see how this movie does. So apparently, I mean, if you're watching the box office right now, regardless of anybody here's involvement, another one is going to resurface. There's just no way around it. But it is comforting to know that they apparently already have an idea that they were already going to have like tacked onto this. So I'm really curious what that is, and I'm hoping that once this resurfaces, which it will, that'll be what we see. Because I do trust them now after seeing this to see where else this is going to go. Especially like I said, if it was a continuous idea to begin with, that's a really good start. So I'll be very curious to see where that goes. But in the meantime, we can go on to Goosebumps 2, I guess. This shouldn't take very long. Well, this had a lot of titles going in. Because it got like a lot of people hyped. Because I think the original title was Goosebumps 2 Horrorland. And everybody assumed that that's the story we were going with. But then I think once they realized that that's what people thought, and that's not what the movie is, they were like, oh, we should probably change the title. So I think the next one was like Slappy's Revenge or something. Which actually, if they had stuck with that, makes a lot of sense. Because this movie is very, very Slappy oriented. Like, he's basically almost in it as much as like the main kids are. Like, he's that much of a focus. And it's almost his movie entirely until like the last third. All the monsters come out, and then they eventually settled on the title Haunted Halloween because originality is fun. So, and Haunted Halloween is apparently this book that R.L. Stine didn't finish at the start before he'd written anything else. It was like an amateur thing he was doing, and this is the story that's been brought to life at like the last minute. Like I said, the last third of the movie, really. And when you know it, it just sort of feels like the same thing with slightly different monsters. We've got the gummy bears now. We've got the monster that Chris Parnell turns into. There's a giant spider made of balloons or some shit. And yeah, we're really straying here. I do stand by the idea that a Goosebumps movie should be like an anthology thing. Where you take like the better stories from the books, except for the Haunted Mask. I don't think the TV episode of the Haunted Mask is going to be topped in quality, but everything else after that on the show was kind of shit. So you could take that and make it a bit more dark, or maybe even a bit more mature, and make this like an anthology movie of those stories that we know. But no, they're just doing this thing. That's not really... It's like they're not even really exploring horror. It seems like they're just more going for the fantasy element, and making it for children that are significantly younger. But and before I do anything, I should probably mention, I said, like, more than once when I was talking about The House with the Clock in Its Walls, that Jack Black wasn't in this. Because when I shot that review... Jack Black was not in this. But then, like, right after that, I got word that they started playing TV spots with him playing R.L. Stine again. And the thing about that, though, is that I am pretty sure that they pretty much made this movie, and there really wasn't a lot of hype around it. People didn't really seem all that excited about it. There was hardly any buzz behind it, at least that I heard. And so they went ahead and got Jack Black, probably had him shave his beard off, because he probably had just done A House with a Clock in Its Walls, and he shoots like 30 seconds of screen time here. Like they make the punchline that he comes into the story, but he's too late to save the day, because he's going to basically do what he did in the first movie, but everything's already done before he can even do anything, and then he's useless. It ends on a cliffhanger, but that also feels really tacked on, and like it's not going anywhere. So he's not even doing Slappy now, because, and I didn't even learn this till afterwards. Number one, apparently he's uncredited, and secondly, Slappy now is a guy named Mick Wingert, I think, who sounds exactly like Jack Black when he's doing Slappy, to the point that I did think it was Jack Black, because it was like, well, okay, at least he came back to do Slappy. That makes sense if he's going to be in it, live action in it for like 30 seconds or whatever. But no, this now makes it even weirder that he's in it so little. But and it's like the fact that he's uncredited. It's like, and you put him in TV spots? What the fuck? I don't. This is very weird and feels very sort of last minute put together. And trying your absolute hardest to make it appealing to somebody, when really people were losing interest quite quickly. And it's also pretty easy to lose interest, especially if you're comparing it to the first movie, which was surprisingly okay. Mainly because it had a lot of really good characters in it, and it was like really funny, as far as I remember. And it had those characters where it's like they were funny and they were people that you almost felt like you sort of hung out with, in your school days or whatever. But now it's like it's not so much that they don't feel, well, no, they don't really feel real. They just sort of feel like they're here. One of them is Jeremy Ray Taylor, who was Ben in It, still playing a kid that gets bullied, knows history, and builds models. So he didn't even really have to change anything. And his best friend, who's just there, apparently they're so close, his mom basically talks to him like he's another one of her children. That scene was confusing. But, and then, yeah, and of course, they're also going to have bully characters, because that's so incredibly exciting. This is a different kind of bully character, but I don't think in a way they intended. Because I was sort of thinking about, like, if you remember Taran Killam in Big Fat Liar, it's like, if this guy was supposed to be like that character, this would make sense, but I think he's supposed to be like a legitimate bully character. But the thing is I don't think I have ever heard a bully bullying a kid and saying the sentence, "Are you wearing my sweater that you got at my grandma's yard sale?" And he's bullying this kid to give him back his sweater. This doesn't sound like a very threatening bully, does it? But I think we're supposed to just accept him as just another type. But so that's where the character stuff lies. And then you've got the big sister that's basically the head of this whole thing, who's annoyed by the little brother. It's just so bland that I don't remember any of their damn names, like not even close. But and then, yeah, they basically just kind of have to walk through all of this. Like, they don't really do a whole lot except witness what happens. And what happens really isn't all that much. Like I said, like, the first entire two-thirds is just Slappy running around being a pain in the ass. And then he brings out all the other creatures, and then it's just the first damn movie again. With lesser creatures. Where they tried to... I don't know if the things in this, like the gummy bears and stuff, come from a particular source material. Not that I remember. They certainly weren't anything I read in the series, so I guess they were just reaching for their own thing, more or less. I don't know, but it all just sort of feels like a really lesser version of the first movie, which was just okay in general. So to feel like a much lesser version of a movie that was really only as good as it was because we were all surprised that it was. Yeah, the bar's really damn low now. Even the R.L. Stine cameo, like the real him, I think he's just playing the same character he did when he walked by for a second in the first movie, and we see him again on stage presenting an award for just like a second. So there's that. Every now and then, there's a good moment. There's a point in time when we're back on the It train. Like, no, there's no reference to the fact that Jeremy Ray Taylor's in this, but it is when Jack Black as R.L. Stine sees in all the carnage that's escaped from his book, there's a red balloon that just kind of floats sideways and just sort of, he has an epiphany, and he's like, I knew that was my idea. I knew I came up with that first. So stuff like that is kind of funny, but overall, there's just really not a lot here. Like I said, Black's whole presence here is just kind of pointless. It's like, I think it only exists so they could put him in the TV spots to say, hey, there's something here you liked from the first movie, so yeah, maybe show up. But yeah, overall, it just it's like they're afraid they wouldn't have a selling point, but they really didn't anyway. So they weren't fooling anybody, though, I don't think. And yeah, like I said, the fact that it basically just sort of avoids horror entirely, I don't know. Because if it wasn't necessarily, if it was its own thing and didn't have a source material, maybe it'd be more like, it'd be easier to accept the kind of movie that it is. Like I said, it feels like it's for like a very young audience. It's constantly moving. It is like, bright and active, which is appealing to really anybody as long as it's, remains in control and isn't just all over the damn place for the sake of it. Like, it does have this sort of vibe of, like, a high-energy fantasy movie, but even then, it's, like, it's sort of like it's going younger than the book's target was, which is just really, it just seems like it's all, like, it's made for, like, a younger audience than even them, but so I'm not quite sure what the aim is here entirely in regards to having an already established fan base and what it is that they're doing. But yeah, I don't know, but because it is like, I mean, not to say that the original books were actually like, the original books, the idea of like suspense was like chapter 1 is 2 pages and every single chapter ended on a cliffhanger that was like really lame, where it was like, the main character opens the refrigerator and is so shocked at what he sees, and then chapter 2 is they were out of milk. Shit like that. So it's not like there's like a huge age difference here, but it was still, you can tell that there's definitely sort of a different tone that I feel like I'd be much more interested to see what they would do if they really went for a more sort of horror vibe, or at least, not like something, totally like shit your pants scary for the target audience they're going for, but just something that sort of has that tone that they just seem to abandon entirely. So I don't know, but it's all confusing. So that's how I feel about it. I'm just kind of confused about its existence, but it's not hurting anybody, so whatever. Um, Next, we're gonna go on to Hellfest. I am not quite sure how this got like a wide release in theaters. For kind of a while too. This has straight to DVD written all over it. The only recognizable name in it is Tony Todd. They're clearly using him for advertising. They've got his big face on the poster. I think he might have been tweeting about it once or twice. And it's like he's in this for like 30 seconds, and you can barely tell it's him even. And it's like he was trying to hide himself as much as he possibly could. But the setup is interesting enough. It is like a traveling park with these really sort of dark underlying tendencies. It just goes from place to place. Something wicked this is not, you can probably say. That had to have been a working title. So this is the kind of movie where you can get a sense of how this really could have worked, but they're going to do everything in their power to take those elements and make them not so. Make them not work. Or just leave a lot to be desired, like the very opening scene, for instance, when we meet our killer, who is apparently called the Other, who's just a dude in a hoodie with a mask that just looks like it was made in some kid's art class or something, and they got an F on it, by the way. And he just sort of stalks around this park, and he'll, like, decide on people, and then stalk them, and then kill them, and that's about it. But the reason we know this is because the first time we see him, he just approaches a girl. But we're supposed to assume this has been happening all day, because the girl says, "Oh my god, aren't you the dude that's been following me all day?" And it's like, I kind of want to see the portions of the movie where he's been following her all day, especially if this was out. It's almost like it was outside of the park in the day, despite the fact that that's not this dude's style, apparently, or at least that we know of or that we see. But it's like, that would have probably been pretty creepy to see this dude stalk her all day. And they sum that up in one line, just for an opening. And it's like, okay, I guess that's what this guy does. Let's see the movie pull this off now. Now that they've established what I want to see, and that that's what they're doing, let's see what happens. Um, you shouldn't. For a movie that looks like this, or a movie that looks straight to video as this, it's best not to go into it looking for anything, because you should already be knowing that it's not going to deliver on jack shit. So, we are introduced to our main characters. We have Natalie, we have her best friend Brooke, and we have Brooke's new roommate Taylor. You know those characters that you meet, usually in horror movies too, where like, just the very second they're on screen and they say their first line, it's just like, you just can't wait to see them die? Well, meet Taylor. Uh, and of course they have boyfriends who don't matter. They're just here to die. And be tools. And walk around this park and be jackasses. So, what happens here is, it is like, and these characters are so basic, it's like, when they all meet in this apartment and we're seeing all the characters together here, it feels like the opening scene of Cabin in the Woods. When we're meeting all the different characters that are all meeting their certain types. But the thing is like, the characters in this are so bland, they don't even bother doing the meeting the types thing. They're so bland they don't even have a type. They're just here to die. And cause drama and suspense that's not doing its job. So I say drama and suspense very lightly. But long story short, this is one of those movies where you root for the killer. That's what we're all leading to. So we do get to them going to the park, and eventually, obviously, it's going to get to a point where they see a murder, but they think that it's part of the park. But we've seen enough to this point that we know that that's not the case. So there's this scene that actually probably could have worked if it had been built up right and from the right point of view, where the main girl, Natalie, is watching this happen, where the dude has her and he's like getting ready to stab her to death. But Natalie thinks this is part of the show, and she thinks the killer's taking too long and being too dramatic, so she's like, dude, like, I'm standing here waiting for a show, just do it. So he stabs her and he kills her. And it's like, the problem here is that we're seeing it from Natalie's point of view. Where it's like, she's just watching, like, we kind of feel for her when she's like, dude, are you gonna do it? Because we're all standing here waiting for you. We know what you're gonna do. But if there was somehow a way to make it feel more like we were seeing this scene from the victim's perspective, imagine how terrifying that is, to be stalked by this killer, and then he's caught you, and he's getting ready to kill you, and there's like one sign of hope. There's a witness, there's a person walking through, there's a person that can get help. And this person looks down at you and then looks at your killer and says, dude, just do it. There's something there. There's something really effective there from that point of view. But like I said, the fact that we're seeing it from Natalie's point of view just makes it another scene in the movie and really shows just how much of, like, the one idea that this movie is, the one idea that's been stretched to feature length. That's the whole, oh, what are they gonna do when all the terror looks like it's part of the show? It's like, just how many times can you watch something horrific happen and your response is, oh, that person thinks it's just part of the show. And it's like, that's just what the whole fucking movie is you saying that. It's like, so, and there's not really any other directions they can really take this. So, that's, yeah. So, then it gets to a point where we have another scene, after Halloween, we've got yet another scene where there's a girl trapped in a bathroom stall. The thing is, though, is that this scene, it's probably one of the more effective scenes in the movie. I know that bar's really low, but there is something here for the build-up, the way they use, like, her boyfriend may or may not have already been offed at this point. He's certainly missing, so we know the answer, she doesn't. So she texts him, and she hears his phone go off in the room. and then the hand like that comes over the stall and like grabs her by the head. There's definitely an effective scene here, but number one, there's still just something off about the execution of everything in this movie. On top of the fact that it's just surrounded by dog shit everywhere you look, is just gonna bring it down no matter what. Um, and so there's and also the thing is you probably think that the setting is really nicely done, like just the whole setup in general, but the way this park looks, like the way it's lit and the kind of attractions they have and sort of the crazy shit they run into, this is the kind of place where it does make sense that nobody's, you know, drawing attention to the fact that people are being murdered, because it does look like it belongs, regardless of how much of a one-trick pony that is in regards to a setup, but it does still feel like that they put most of their effort into like the setting without focusing on anything else, like the characters and how they talk to each other and why they're being killed and how they're being killed. The kill scenes in this aren't memorable or creative at all. And the thing is this kind of setup seems like it was made for that kind of creativity. It's like, this crazy ass place, what all different ways could you kill somebody? There's one lazy ass scene where two main characters just get stabbed, like one right after the other. It's like two major characters here, and he's like, "I'm going to stab you with this hand. I'm going to stab you with that hand," and that's it. And they're really underwhelming. There is one kill involving a close up of an eye that might be memorable to some people, but it's like it still feels like it's something we've seen before, and it's still just nothing about this movie is memorable enough, just in execution or anything, and even in the idea stage, it just doesn't feel like enough. And then there's the whole thing of okay, so the thing about this is that I can probably imagine people liking it to an extent, especially if they're like horror fans and they're not particularly picky. I could see them taking to this for like the visuals and the idea and the setup and all that. But I understand people might say stuff like, what does the character development matter? The whole point is that they're just here to die and all that. But it does, if you look at movies like Halloween, for instance, even just the smallest little character trait, like even if you just have a character do one thing that makes you say, hey, I kind of like that person, there's definitely a different feeling than movies like this, where, like I said, it's one of those movies where you just root for the killer. Where it's like, not only is it that the characters are unmemorable, but there's just nothing to like about them at all. There are characters like Taylor, for instance, where she's in most of the movie, and you just really want to. I know I don't. It may sound like too much, but I mean, it's no, it's not. So that's basically. I don't really know what else to say about this. There is. The ending is kind of bullshit, but I can see what they were going for, kind of. But even so, it's been done and it feels really, really lazy. It feels like they just didn't. It feels like they thought of this ending once they got to that point in the script and they didn't know how they were going to end it. So they're like, oh, well, it'd be pretty effective if we did. And then, it'd be a spoiler, but I could name one or two movies that are like, they probably took inspiration from to get an ending like that. But, yeah, so, like I said, if you don't really discriminate much in your horror, this actually will probably be fine to you. I was kind of hoping to take to it in a guilty way, just for kind of having, like, an old-fashioned sort of slasher vibe to it. But it's just too poorly made on most fronts, so, like, so I think the production design is the only time they didn't, like, really fall short. So, yeah, that's pretty much all there is here. Every now and then there is, like, a really memorable set. Like, the room with all the white faces is a very cool-looking, memorable sort of visual, but that's one in an entire movie, so take that for what you will. Let's go ahead and talk about Tales from the Hood 2. I was introduced to the first Tales from the Hood about 4 or 5 years ago, and like really fell in love with it. I had a friend that knew I was all about the horror anthology stuff and how it's like one of my favorite things ever. And so you should really check this thing out. And I just sort of loved it instantly. And the whole idea of how they were sort of, it was also like kind of there was the whole racial allegory. Even allegory feels like almost like it's not. It's almost like it's not subtle enough to even use the word allegory. But there's certainly like it was sort of a message movie, but it didn't stray away from exactly what it was. This really sort of campy horror thing that just went all out, got really creative, got big gore scenes, all that stuff. Just really great stuff, and that final scene is like legendary. Um, and so when you hear about that movie getting a straight to DVD sequel, this the movie is probably exactly what you imagine when you hear that it's getting a straight to DVD sequel. Um, because well, it actually starts off interestingly enough with this opening credit sequence that sort of looks like it sort of reminded me of the Remains of the Day musical number in Corpse Bride. So it was like, okay, you've got a little flair in your opening title sequence. Let's see if you can keep that up. And they just immediately told me to go fuck myself. They didn't. They weren't even gonna try here. So obviously, we have a nice, appropriate wraparound story in the first movie where Clarence Williams III is the dude that runs the funeral home, and there's something just sort of weirdly sinister about this. And then obviously, the devil and the coffins, all that thing. Um, Same character now played by Keith David, which, if you had to replace Clarence Williams III, yeah, Keith David's probably the way to go. He's got the laugh that's perfect. He's got the voice for it. But the thing here is, number one, they play the devil thing up like it's a twist again, even though he's playing the same character, but whatever. Uh, but we're not doing the funeral home thing now. No, our wraparound story is something about a robot patriot. I think his name is like Robo Patriot or something. And they're programming the tales into him, and he's gonna be like this judge, jury, and executioner for. I don't fucking know. I don't know. It's one of the dumbest things I've maybe ever seen, at least this year. And they're really, really gonna bring home the whole not political, but well, yeah, obviously, but in many ways, certain messages, particularly about today's political climate. So, but where I said that even though I wouldn't call the first movie doing that subtle, they remained what they were, a big campy horror anthology movie. And that's how I remember the movie most. But this movie is just going to go all out on the whole message thing, including the way it sort of makes all these characters just these certain types, just these political types with like nothing else about them. So you've got this dude that basically just is all the bad qualities that you see. Like obviously he's like a womanizer of sorts. He's always like, flirting with them and grabbing women that he works with, and he says stuff like, they're talking about making something bigger, and he looks at the woman and he's like, I know you know something about wanting things big, or something like that. Then he goes over to Keith David, and he does the "you're kind" thing. And it's like, this, and the fact that this character solely exists, this terrible, terrible character exists, just to really, really drive home this point, like it's being drilled into your head and then hammered in afterwards, in this really stupid, over-the-top way. And it's also one of those things of, as far as the message is trying to get across, it's like you look at because the first movie was, what, 1995, and you look at things now, and it's like nowadays there's like the constant sort of news cycle thing, and the fact that there's like nothing nobody already knows. So you look at this, and it's like, what can this movie really have to say and show? Because in the first movie it's like stuff that they didn't see, the public didn't see like as much, and it was sort of like this way of like presenting it in this, once again, really over the top crazy way, but still presenting it. in a way that felt like it was showing something to its audience that needed to be seen. But it's like, the fact that we see and know everything now, it's like, how can this movie possibly offer something like that? Or is it just going to ram home the same points and think it's somehow being profound? Well, I think you know the answer. So, we start off and we have... there's... Oh, yeah, and another thing they bring up in regards to this is that just really goes home is it's lines, like I said, I don't know if they think they're being subtle or if the whole point is... I mean, I'm sure the whole point is to get, like, you know, the giggling in the audience or whatever at the familiarity of it. But that kind of seems to be contradicting what you're trying to do. Where you're trying to say something about these things as opposed to just getting people to laugh because they recognize them. Exhibit A being the moment when, obviously, I talked about this dude that just harasses, like, all the women he works with. And Keith David goes up to one of the women. He's saying, does he do that all the time? And she's like, yeah. And he's like, does he even do it to you? And I swear to God, she says, yeah, me too. With, like, emphasis. This is the way this movie's getting its message across. And the tales haven't even started yet. So, in regards to the first tale, we've got, they go for the killer doll thing. You know, something that happened in the first movie, the Corbin Burnson thing. Obviously it's a bit different. The killer doll in this one is giant now, but even so. And it does take it into a different direction. Now, when you see this first tale, your first thought might be, well, that's kind of fucking insane. And it's gruesome in a really bizarre way. And it's impactful, maybe not for the message it's trying to say, but just for the visual itself and what's happening. That's as crazy as... The movie peaks there, in regards to craziness. That's as crazy as it gets. It's not like the first movie that just kind of kept peaking, where it's like, just when you think, you know, the movie's reached some height, you get the awesome David Alan Grier storyline, and then just when you think that might be the peak, then something else, and then the ending's like the ultimate peak. This movie's done after the first segment. Like, that's... I mean, it's still shit, but it's as good as this shit's gonna be, in the first tale. So, and that involves winning characters like this dude who says stuff like, I'm coming for that ass, girl. This is also apparently the guy that, about 20 seconds after he says that, is into slavery roleplay. Because it suits the story, I guess. You see this guy at the beginning of this segment, and what he does here to sort of work in the racial thing, and it's like, no, I don't even feel like this is the same character, so it's just failing right away, but like I said, it does have a crazy-ass ending, but that's as crazy as it gets, as the ending to this first segment. So, our second segment involves a psychic. And this is also really disjointing, because it's built up like it's going to be this thing about gangsters. But then after the gangster thing happens and they kill a dude, who knows where money that they buried is, we cut to a psychic. It's kind of like if we had like an entire half movie about Christopher McDonald's character in Requiem for a Dream, and it was supposed to somehow make sense and connect to everything. But it does eventually turn into they're going to use the psychic to get to the guy so they know where the money is. But the whole thing is that the guy's full of shit. He's not an actual psychic. He is a liar. We see his whole process, how he gets information, all that stuff. But for the sake of the tale, somehow he gets possessed. Like, somehow it just works. And we just have to buy it. And we get really, really, absolutely terrible, not even in the charming way, CGI bullshit. We get stuff where once he's possessed by all these gangster dudes, it's like, the whole punchline is, oh, this old white guy is doing black guy voice. That kind of thing. And it gets dopier and more embarrassing as it goes. I didn't know whether to hate the actors for what they were doing, or to feel bad for them, because the way they were being directed is just absolutely humiliating them. But everybody in this segment, This was probably the worst one, because it gets like really fucking cartoonish really damn fast. It's one of those cases where the guy answers the door and there's an attractive woman draped in the doorway, and I swear to fucking God, a saxophone is playing. And then it gets more and more cartoonish as it goes. And that is not the direction you... Like, if there's one direction you don't want to go with this, cartoonish is that direction. And they just went balls fucking first into it. With all the humiliating results for everybody involved. That was just... I really fucking wish I hadn't seen that. And then the third one... The third one is basically this really poorly edited mess about date rape and online predators. And they make... you want to talk about completely unsubtle, not that it necessarily needs to be subtle, but I mean, the characters basically just come out and actually say the words, "Now we're the online predators," or something like that. Just very in your face. But the thing about it, though, is that this story is so abrupt and so underwhelming, it's like barely 10 minutes long. And they have nothing to say. It is like the predators become the prey. The end, and there's really a roundabout way to get there too. Like I said, it's this whole date rape thing, just to get to this really weak ass payoff, just really abruptly. Because I believe there's only 4 tales. There was only 4 in the first one, and then yeah, and it's like, and this movie's almost 2 hours too. So it's like, part of me wants to say, oh, they were straining to get material, so that's why they have this really short one in here that means absolutely jack shit. But then you look at the runtime and you're like, well, wait a minute, they have too much going on. There's too much in this movie. How did this end up in here? And then we just sort of reach the peak of the desperation with this final story that actually has the gall to bring Emmett Till into this. And try to be like really dramatic and profound, and really kind of lose the horror element altogether. To basically give us this like, there's no real allegory, there's no horror, there's no entertainment value. It's just basically like they're want to throw us this laughably heavy-handed history lesson that have somehow worked this married couple that's pregnant into the story. She's white and he's black. And this whole thing of the sacrifice that Emmett Till made, and the fact that this guy is going to be like a Republican, so he's got to be like... It's almost like they were trying to do like a Christmas Carol, but with real historical figures, past and present. Which just sort of leaves a bad taste in your mouth altogether. Especially with how shamelessly heavy-handed it is. And there's actually a point in time where I talk about how, there's like allegories, or there's like a message in there or something. A lot of this segment is people just straight up discussing politics. Just no beating around the bush, they just discuss politics just right there. No symbolism, no anything. They just flat out do it. And if that sounds like entertainment value to you in a movie that's supposed to be some anthology horror movie that's all kinds of crazy, over-the-top shit. And the thing is like, you look at this, and you look at the Emmett Till thing, and they're like trying to be so profound, and just really... But then you think about the whole fucking a giant evil doll that the first segment was, and it's like, we got from here to here. You can't really do that. And then after that... They just go right back into the killer robot thing after the whole Emmett Till thing. What in God's name could anybody have possibly been thinking? This is absolutely embarrassing. I don't know. Like, they forgot what the rest of the movie was. Like, they weren't watching other people's segments, and it's like, okay, you understand, maybe there's a tonal issue because different directors doing different segments and all that, but it's like, no, and they split it up like, this segment with the doll was directed by this dude, and this segment was directed by this dude, and it's like the same 2 dudes, just alternating. It's like, nope, they just fucked it all up themselves. There was no, you can't throw it under the bus and say, oh, there were a whole bunch of people working together with different ideas, doing their own different segments, so yeah, there might be a tonal issue. No. Basically the same fucking dudes just doing going back and forth. So that's yeah. So I don't even I don't know. I wish I hadn't seen this. I wish it hadn't been made because I really love that first movie, and I really hope that this is never like sort of associated with it. I hope it's treated like most straight-to-video sequels are, and I'll just, be in one of the bins at Walmart before too long, and some poor unfortunate soul will probably dig it out and then put it in a yard sale for 50 cents, and then it'll be on the cycle forever, whatever. So, let's go over now to one of the Netflix original movies that came out this month with Apostle. I wasn't quite sure. I didn't realize this was like horror going into it. If you want to call it that. Yeah, it's definitely got horror elements in it, but there's a lot of genres you can probably throw at this movie. But obviously the main selling point was that it's Gareth Evans' movie, who did the Raid movies. And he's exploring this whole the whole cult aspect. Obviously, the whole cult thing has like been really popular the last few years, but it's still an area that's fascinating enough to where it would be easy to not get burnt out on this if just the movies kind of keep doing different things with it, and this movie does a whole lot of different shit to it in the best ways. The star is Dan Stevens, who is really good here. He uses his eyes a lot in this to great effect, without too much dialogue, which actually suits him quite well. When we first started seeing him a lot, I think I kind of just was very dismissive of him and didn't really see much personality in him. But he's really been going in some interesting directions lately and showing that he can do a lot of different stuff. So he's definitely enticing to watch. But there's also another performance here, an award-worthy performance from Michael Sheen, is basically the head of this cult, and Dan Stevens has shown up to look for his sister, who's being held captive by the cult for ransom because they're basically running out of resources. After Michael Sheen has built this place supposedly from the ground up using like his blood, and it just turns into this whole sort of weird. There's like a supernatural vibe to it. But there's plenty of other vibes to it. Like there are so many different directions, but somehow like never loses consistency. Like the crazier it gets, just sort of the more progressively it's been building to that. I feel like it's kind of comparable. It's easily comparable to stuff like, say, The Wicker Man or The Witch. But there's also sort of in the British horror stuff. I think somebody recently compared it to Blood on Satan's Claw, which I actually just saw for the first time like last week. So now with that fresh in my mind, I can see that. But there's also A Cure for Wellness that came out last year. Sort of kind of has that vibe. But the thing about A Cure for Wellness was how when it went crazy in its last third, it kind of felt like it came from out of nowhere, despite the sinister tone of the movie up to that point. This one feels like when it gets crazier and the weirder shit is introduced, the best thing about it is that there is like a second where it's very jarring, but then after you get past that initial reaction, it kind of makes sense. Like you kind of feel like, yeah, I think we're about here in this story. So I really like how he was able to pull that off, because that had to have been very difficult to pull off. Obviously, as it goes on, when you look at, say, like Evans' style, and you look at the kind of movie this is, where you think about movies like The Raid and The Raid 2 or whatever, and you see this movie that's set in like 1905, and the whole cult thing, how it's very, very slow burn, and it's like, it's weird that you have these movies that are on like such different landscapes, yet he has such an identifiable sort of style to him. Especially when, like, the big violence breaks out, because it is, like, said, it is very slow burn, and it does build up, like, sort of a classic horror movie. Where you do have, like, traditional, scare scenes, like, over his shoulder you might see, like, a woman at the end of a hallway or something, or a giggling child wearing a mask or something. But then it gets to stuff where it just feels like it goes straight horror, like the first time he sees the woman, like, rise out of the blood. And the character, I think he goes by the Grinder, the dude with the thing on his head, where it's like, this is a kind of thing where I can just imagine this being in a movie that's not well executed, but I can recognize that if it had been well executed, this would have been great. Um, but this movie does pull it off, where like the Grinder, for instance, is the kind of character that could have so easily been like some straight to DVD thing or something, and it's like, that seems like a cool idea, but the execution is just not here. But he's able to somehow pull that off and make it feel like all these weird things belong in here, the more we sort of dig the hole in and find where the hell this is going. Um, but that's the thing also, is that it does have some very, like, regularly suspenseful moments, like, outside of horror. And there's actually been a very sort of suspenseful scene leading right up to this, where there's somebody with a shotgun on the other side of a door that Dan Stevens may or may not walk through. And when we have a scene like that, traditionally suspenseful, right after that it does something that's like straight up horror. And it's like, so finding that balance, and the fact that this movie is able to do that, just really sort of sets a tone that would definitely be hard to imitate. But yeah, and they do get creative with the gore, of course. There is a point in time close to the end where there's like a crude drill is used, and once we get to that point, and some of the stuff Dan Stevens goes through, it could probably easily be dismissed as torture porn, certain aspects of it. But I still think that there's this, and the fact, and putting that kind of thing after something that's such a slow burn, you could really, it's an easy way to sort of lose your way and lose your tone. But like I said, I feel like the progression here is so well done that there's not really like much of a misstep when you go into those directions, where you actually, it's surprisingly expected once you get over the initial shock of seeing some of the things that you do. And just some of the unsettling ways it's shown to us visually, whether it be just characters in the background, like the dudes with the black hoods are just nightmare-inducing. But then there's stuff like the shots, like when the shot's upside down and then like comes around right side up. And it's not just flashy for the sake of flashy. It definitely adds that extra layer to the scene, and just the way. And also, it can get a bit confusing towards the end when we're jumping back and forth in time. But overall, there is definitely a sort of distinguished factor here that they're able to pull off in a really nice way. That, like I said, had to have been very difficult to keep this movie on both feet, and he does actually manage to pull it off, which of course he does. I mean, I've praised his other movies so endlessly. It's weird to act surprised, but I really wasn't sure what to think of this as a fan of his, because it was going to be such a different direction. But yeah, it for the most part did pay off, and the fact that it actually becomes more intriguing the crazier it gets, instead of just seeming like it's, running out of ideas and throwing things at the wall to see if it'll stick. It does actually just keep pulling you in with all that stuff, and it doesn't feel like it's, doing it just to do it, which a lesser movie certainly would have done. It does probably need to be shorter. It could definitely be much more tense and taut and all that if it was maybe 15 minutes or so shorter. It's 2 hours and 10 minutes. It probably doesn't need to be, but as is, I still like it quite a bit, because it's still got, like, really just in general, I was talking about the aesthetic, but it is, like, just the way that has such a dirty look about it. Like, it just looks so grimy and disgusting. But, like, say, things that aren't drenched in mud or drenched in blood and all that. But there's still just something so rich in the atmosphere at the same time, where it doesn't always feel like, because movies can get really unpleasant if they make you just feel like you're covered in dirt. But there's still just something in the atmosphere of this movie that just works so well, and brings that to life in a really nice way. So, in a really nice, creepy way too. That slow burn really helps. So, yeah, Netflix actually put out another movie that's not complete bullshit. I can't believe it. Let's see. Let's keep. They've got plenty of prestige projects coming out in the next couple of months. Let's see if they can keep it up. Private Life, by the way, I think will also be on that next video. So yeah. So let's go on to Summer of '84. This is something that I had mixed feelings about going into because obviously we're really caught up in this '80s throwback thing, especially with horror and synth scores and shit. Um, where it's like half coming of age, half horror, whatever. Throw some thriller in. The cast is gonna mainly be children, all that stuff. Going through children problems, while also going through horror problems or whatever. But also something with a very familiar plot. A plot that seems to work quite a bit, predictable as it is, where somebody in the neighborhood might be a serial killer. So you got like Rear Window, you've got Fright Night, you've got The Burbs. Rear Window, you might as well throw Disturbia in there. I feel like all those other options aside, I feel like this movie steals quite a bit from Disturbia. You know what? It has Disturbia's tagline, where it's every killer lives next door to someone. But this movie doubled down. Not only did it take Disturbia's tagline, that's also the last line of the movie. So you could see the derivative nature from a mile away just by looking at the poster. But it's like, do we give it a chance? Because, like I said, predictable as this kind of plot is, it's been pulled off many times before in decent ways. Even kids shows like think Are You Afraid of the Dark? We've had a couple episodes like this, stuff like that. Um, there was the episode of Rocker's Modern Life that was a spoof of Rear Window and all the Hitchcock stuff. But the thing here is that the movie begins, and the very first thing we hear is that '80s synth score. And it's like, that used to be so appealing. I know that was the big appeal for like It Follows and stuff like that. And for movies that are actually from that era, certainly. But it's actually getting to a point now where this is so overplayed. I think I don't think that I didn't give the movie a chance, because I was, but just for the sake of it, I will mention that when I start a movie now, especially a horror movie that comes out today, that's centered around this sort of era, if the very first thing I hear is the '80s synth score, I'm gonna start the movie hating it. Like, I try to start in the middle, and then it's like, is it gonna go up or is it gonna go down throughout? Um, Anymore, if a movie starts with an '80s synth score and it was released today, you're starting down here. So, with that in mind, it does go into us being introduced to all these characters. Now, the trouble here is that in a lot of this stuff, the kids can be somewhat relatable. That's the whole thing. They actually, or if they're not relatable, they at least sound like actual kids, and their relationships seem to actually be authentic. But the thing is this is yet another one of those movies where the screenwriters just said, well, they're kids. They're going through puberty. All they're thinking about is raunchy stuff. So all they're going to talk about, all they're going to say is just raunchy stuff. It's like this guy thought that every kid in like middle school is Richie Tozier. Like every single one of them. Like he's not just one personality. He's not, just one thing. There's one kid in particular too that just does this in the most flat way possible, where like every line of dialogue he says is that kind of thing. Mostly talking about masturbation, and it's like Finn Wolfhard was really able to like give another layer to Rich. Obviously, it was in the writing, of course, but I mean, his performance also had to do that, where we really feel like there's more layers to Richie than just his sort of, raunchy language and attitude and stuff like that. None of these characters go beyond that, but they all desperately want to do the raunchy thing anyway. How they're constantly talking about beating off, and I believe one of them actually says, to all the other kids, I gotta go withdraw from the spank bank. So, like I said, yeah, sure, kids are raunchy when they talk in real life, especially when they're unsupervised, but this just reeks of a try-hard screenwriter who thinks this is all there is to it. Where it's like, kids, that's accurate, because, kids talk dirty. The end. So it's like no other layers need to be added. Nothing else needs to be added to this dialogue. As long as they're talking dirty, that makes it sound authentic, and that's all my job is here. So yeah, that's just all. That just whole thing felt off, and it's gets very very hard to attach to these characters. It also doesn't help that this is one of those cases where there are kids getting offed, throughout, maybe two or three or something. And every now and then they're like introduced, and then we get the vibe of what's going to happen, and then the scene ends and it's implied. But the thing here is that none of the victims are like kids that we know in the movie. It's like whenever a kid shows up and we know they're doomed, it's like we've never seen this fucking guy before. And if we have, he obviously wasn't memorable enough. He was probably just in the fucking background or something. So it's like, if, like, there's a big enough group here. If it has just been happening within the group, that would have been significantly more interesting and would have had significantly more character work in it. But no, it's always just some random, and then and then the four of them get together. They talk about their fucking dicks, and then they accuse the neighbor who's like a cop or something. Um, and the thing about that is that, yes, obviously throughout there are scenes that feel like they're stealing from Disturbia of all the other, ones that came before it could be stealing from. Like, for instance, when the kid gets caught looking at the girl, who in this case was like his ex-babysitter. And then, of course, she comes over, and it goes from there. And there's a kind of a weird vibe. I don't know if it's the fact that she's the former babysitter thing or what, but there's just something, like, really off about this supposedly charming relationship between this dude and his ex-babysitter that's supposed to be like 100% romantic. And not only did it seem shoehorned in, but it didn't feel, just it didn't feel natural at all coming from them. Like, if there was a certain chemistry between them, it probably wouldn't matter, and you could actually see the characters, being close to each other or whatever, but it's just really really damn forced and just doesn't come through at all here, and they spend quite a bit of time on that. It's just falling flat every single time. And then just the making in general just feels amateur as fuck. It does have I think 3 directors. I will say, you know, there's a surprising amount of consistency for 3 directors, but even so, it still just feels messy as fuck, and it's like those movies that people just basically shoot in their backyard and then try to get released at film festivals. Just so happened that this one had an 80 cent score, so people loved it automatically and gave it positive word there. But there's really not much here. Every now and then there's a suspenseful scene. The scene where the cop comes over and insists on making a call with his phone is like a really suspenseful scene that they play up nicely, but overall it's just going in all the directions you know and not trying to do anything whatsoever to differentiate it. The ending is extremely unsatisfying. There's the whole thing where it's like you keep expecting it to do something different, because obviously indie movies like this, where it's always somebody trying to show off how different they are or whatever. So you're kind of spend the whole movie waiting for that. But the problem is that with this concept, every example I gave has the same ending. Because it's like, you have this setup, you're pretty much doomed from the start to be predictable, because how else do you end? If you end it in the unexpected way, the way we don't think it's going to go, you're going to have a really abrupt movie with no climax. So it's like you use this plot, that has to be your ending. But you sort of keep waiting for, like, I kept waiting for, like, some extra twist or something that just never came. And then, like I said, not only is it just that obvious, but they find a way to make it even more, like, unappealing, anticlimactic, unsatisfying when it ends. So, and it's like, this, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what people saw in this, but because it's like, what do you have? Like, obviously, it's not necessarily all about the story, because you, obviously, like all those other examples, you can pull it off even if you know what the ending is, but like, so what's the appeal then? The characters? fuck no. I just went through that. There's no personality that stands out. All they do is talk about masturbating or whatever the hell. So I mean, what does this have to offer? I don't know. I don't get it. But so that's something we can just throw onto the amateur should have been straight to DVD pile. So speaking of, let's finally end this in more ways than one with the last Sharknado, Sharknado 6, whatever you want to call it. The subtitle is It's About Time. I suppose there's something clever there if you want to be generous, but I don't. So obviously the big thing here is it's like, oh, how can we... Okay, well, before I even go into this one, obviously, just hit the bullet points because every review I do of these sounds the same. You can't do the so bad... I don't believe in the so bad it's good thing anyway, but even then, it's like you can't be so bad it's good if you're trying to do that. It's like they keep losing their way because it's like, oh, we're being intentionally bad. But I'm pretty sure they secretly wish they were badass the way they do the chainsaw thing, and it's like they're trying to be cool. But obviously if they fail, they just have the lazy fallback of, oh nope, we were just making it purposefully bad, haha, and then they go cry themselves to sleep or some shit. And obviously you've got, you know, the dead end acting. Tara Reid is obviously a main character in this, and there's like multiple versions of her in this now. So she's playing multiple roles, each as bland as the last. And it's not even like entertainingly bland either, because you look at like the way they say some of their lines, and that's where you can really see what the problem is. They're just fucking stone-faced, no matter what the line is. And it's like, they don't go in either direction. I would love to be a fly on the wall when these people are being directed and exactly what's being said to them in regards to what they need to do. Because, like I said, the line readings are just so dead. It's like, they're not saying it with, like, conviction or sincerity, which would work because I mean, it would still be stupid and not effective because the movies are just shit in general. But the thing is, it's like, if you wanted to play up that it's the so bad it's good thing, they would because we know the ridiculous nature of what's going on, the comedy would come from them playing it totally serious. Or there's the other side of that coin where they can play it really over the top and act like they're in the movie they're in. But the thing is that they're not doing either of those. It's like they're just as bored with these as everybody else is. And they're trying to figure out how they even got into another one while they're actually saying their lines while they're being recorded. And it's like, just it's like, what's even the goddamn point? So, obviously, it's like, oh, we gotta go big and crazy, so it's like, let's add dinosaurs so that really uncreative, drooling people can go on Twitter and say, did you see that Sharknado now has dinosaurs? Crazy. So, we see these dinosaurs, and once again, I'm sure the defense is purposefully bad, but it's like, not only is the CGI bad, but this first dinosaur that's in this frame is just standing perfectly still. Like, they didn't even really animate it to move, they just animated it. And then it moves slightly. And then, of course, he has to slide down the tail like fucking Fred Flintstone. And it's this really embarrassing thing where it's like really slowed down because that's the only way they could get the effect in time. And that's, I mean, once again, you can defend this and say, oh, but the bad effects, they're on purpose. But that's the thing, is I don't. It's all redundant for me to say that's not working. That is not a suitable defense for how much shit they've tried to get away with. And of course, they're also using the time thing as an excuse to bring back characters that I don't remember. I remember they're returning because they say you and they say the name, and then they talk about the other movies and shit. Whatever. Seriously, hand to God, you know I saw all these because there's record of this, but it's like, I don't remember Judah Freelander being in any of these. I really, really don't. But he's apparently a returning character. Um, and so we get into the whole cameos thing. Like I said, maybe I'm just getting older or what, or maybe these movies are just getting shittier, but with each new movie, I know less and less of the cameos. And I know where the cameos are, even if I don't recognize the person, because it's usually somebody that's totally out of place in the environment, and they're just a side character that might as well be an extra that the camera is on for way too long, and this person has way too many lines. So it's like, whenever that happened, I assumed that person was a cameo, and somebody somewhere knows who that person is. But then you do have some recognizable faces, like Neil deGrasse Tyson. Yep, a Neil deGrasse Tyson cameo. Congratulations. Your jokes are at the very, very most on par with Zoolander 2's. Good fucking job, you idiots. So then we have stuff like Tara Reid comes in on a pterodactyl, and she's like, "Oh, I flew in on a pterodactyl because the movie's so crazy." And then it's like, this is my dinosaur Tara, and it's like, "Oh, because you're Tara Reid." It's like, no, because it's a pterodactyl, and it's like, really, that's just as idiotic as the other one would have been. So there's that. Oh, here's an original idea. Are you ready for this? This is when the movie's creativity really peaks. This is when they really take off on the ideas. This is when the hilarity becomes too much to bear. They're time traveling now, right? What would be really cool? What would be really funny to do right now? How about Back to the Future references? That's new. That's something nobody's ever done. Oh, I can't wait to hear the brilliance that comes from this. Oh my god, there's so many possibilities. Well, there's a character that says the words Back to the Future. There's a sign in the background that says, like, Doc Brown's drugstore or something. I'll bet they thought that was hidden, too. I'll bet they thought, oh, I can't wait to see the people on Twitter that see that Easter egg that we lingered on for quite some time while a character walked by. Then Judah Freelander says the whole scene of, like, they're talking about all the repercussions of time travel, and he's like, oh, and I'd hate to go back in time and almost make out with my mom at the Enchantment Under the Sea dance. And just for the characters to look at him like, what? As if they've never fucking seen the movie, but, you know, as long as he explained the whole goddamn thing, congratulations. I think that was supposed to be a joke. I don't really know. So, and the jokes get so desperate, too. There's actually, a point in time where they just go full on with, like, they get into one of the tornadoes, and just the whole thing is a reference machine, where it's the Freeburg and Seltzer is all over again. It's various people dressed up as, like, famous characters, saying famous lines, but with the word shark in them. There's a guy dressed up like Clint Eastwood that says, "Go ahead, shark my day." We do get Dee Snider saying, "I'm not going to take this anymore." I guess that's a little more obscure, just considering the people watching this are probably fucking 12-year-olds, if that. I may be insulting 12-year-olds by saying that. And then eventually it gets to the point to where the references, you can tell, were just added in post at the last minute. Where they thought they had a real joke on their hands. Like, the scene in Deadpool 2... when they're Cable, the future, that whole thing, and he says the line, "What Sharknado are they on where you're from?" So obviously the brilliant people saw that in Deadpool 2, and they're like, oh, we gotta make the reverse joke. Oh man, they're just handing stuff to us on a silver platter now. We gotta do this. Okay, so I know what we're gonna do. We're gonna say, what Deadpool movie are we on in the future? That's what we're going to say. It's like what they said, only the other way around. and you can tell that it was after the movie had already been fucking made. And so they were like, we gotta put that line in somewhere. Let's get Ian Ziering to come back in and record that line. And then we'll just put it somewhere in the movie. Just at random. We'll just get like an overhead shot where we can't see anybody's mouth moving, and we'll just put the line in. Because we have it. And voila, we've got a new joke. A joke that's so fucking hilarious this was all necessary. It wasn't fucking funny when Ryan Reynolds said it, for God's sake. So, okay, with all this said, it is like they promise us that it's ending. So we actually have a heartwarming ending where we come back to the beginning of the first movie. We've got archive footage of John Hurt in there, which may be the most accidentally poignant thing we have. And it does actually bring itself to a close, and it's like, just the fact that it gives itself a heartwarming ending, like, sincerely, like, really, really sincerely. You've got, like, the sad piano music and everybody being happy and all that. Doesn't even end on a cliffhanger. Like, it's that much of an ending. And it's like, that in itself, you can tell that this wasn't just that we're trying to make something so bad thing. No, this was the dead fucking giveaway that they had some investment in this, and that this entire thing, that we got all 6 of these movies, was the outcome. And the fact that they tried to pathetically pass that off as, oh no, it's supposed to be bad. But we secretly really want you to like it. But that, for me at least, that's never going to happen. I cannot be more ecstatic that this pathetic piece of garbage will be over forever. Now, of course, there is a point in time where Ian Ziering says, time for a reboot, while they're during the climax. Maybe that will be the case, but I am tired of, I'm not going to, I don't care that Owen has pressured me to do every single one of these movies, and that's the only reason I have. Don't care what he wants anymore. This will be the last one of these I ever fucking see. So, that's it. Alright, I think we're done, finally. So, next week, I pretty much told you everything. Bad Times in the El Royale, The Hate You Give, Sorry to Bother You, a couple of other things, all that. The horror verses, we've got a little bit more left. Those will be, and then go into the whole thing. I'll be starting a new segment that I'm very excited about through November and December. So there's that. Yeah, so that's what's coming. So until all that stuff, that's it.